Well, one of the things I want to do is answer some of the questions that I've been getting from people that I haven't had a chance to get to. So today I'm going to talk to you about a post that somebody made about triggers. This is a person who is in one of my courses and was watching one of the videos and said, wow, this video is great. It gives me so much information. And she, I think it says she, I'm not actually sure, continues, I'm recently coming out of a little bit of a prolonged trigger. Now, who can relate to that, right? At least this time, I knew I was triggered, but it didn't make it easier to be with or come out of it. Now, I'm sure many people have this experience, right? Let's go through it again. I knew I was triggered. That's a plus, right? I know that I was triggered. But is this true? Knowing that we're triggered doesn't mean it's easier to deal with it or to come out of it until we know some of the secrets of it. So let's see if I can get to it all. So the person continues, when I was in it, I just really, really wanted to be out of it so desperately. Again, who doesn't know this experience? And I knew that desire was probably making it worse for me, but I couldn't help myself. Again, this is something we all know, right? Also, it was so physical, key, and distracting, yes, and I didn't know what the trigger was. And sometimes that is the hard thing, to map out what's going on here with how it links to the triggered response inside. Not knowing that the trigger was, or what part of me was triggered, was also really hard. Anyway, not sure if somebody can answer this, but do all people struggle with these things because everything mentioned in this video encompasses so much of our daily life as a human being? Or are these things that only folks with a trauma history, PTSD, experience? So let me see if I can make this somewhat more understandable, and let me see if I can uncomplicate it. So here's my little handy dandy board. Let's see if you can see it here. Let me move over here. Okay, so if you remember, when we're triggered, let me back up a moment. We can get triggered if we have a really solid sense of self, absolutely. But what makes a trigger so hard, and this is what the person said, I knew I was triggered. Okay, so you're here in this year, right? And let's call it now. In the present moment, I knew I was triggered. But it didn't make it easier to be with or come out of it. And here is one of the key reasons why. When we're triggered in this moment, and we don't know why, or we can't manage it in some way, or we can't be with it, or it takes it so out of proportion for us, it is almost 100% guaranteed connected to something in the past. And now these somethings in the past are not, you look at, I'm making them nice little boxes right here. This is not the way it feels inside. These little boxes do not feel neat and tidy. They're chaos in there, right? So the reason why they are happening the way they are, let me use a different color, is that in this moment when we're feeling like I don't have a grip on it, I just really, really want to be out of it desperately, it's because this is so big and overwhelming that it's not just encased in this moment, it actually is leaking through and covering this moment, right? So that's why it feels so horrible, is we haven't been able to link this moment with this moment and make a connection. Instead, this is seeping out and filling us. Now, the person said it was so physical and distracting, and that's the key piece. When our bodies are talking to us, and that's what this is happening. When we're triggered and it's so physical and so distracting, we don't know what it's about. It's usually a message from another time and space. We can call it time traveling. When the only way the message can get through is through the physical sensation. So rather than coming up with words, it comes up as a body experience. And we have to be able to translate that. It's key. This is a key piece. Now, here's why. When this distress, upset, trauma, whatever it was embedded, it was embedded usually at a time of our lives when we didn't have the narrative capacity to make sense of it. We didn't have the external structure to help us understand it. This is the whole piece of developmental capacity of a child or development. Or it was imprinted in such a horrifically overwhelming affective state that it was so disruptive and we couldn't put ourselves back together again then. But generally, the reason why we can't is because we didn't have a psychological self-structure built at an earlier age to be able to hold and contain whatever is overwhelming here. So what happens is we grow up, and this overwhelming stuff, let me actually try it in a different way, because I'm telling you a lot of little pieces at the same time. So let's say here, all that overwhelm happened at some point in your life. And this is just normal. It's not even overwhelm. Let's just say that growing up, we have a different capacity to understand the world. It's done through felt experience. It's done through sensing the world rather than understanding the world. And so what happens is if nobody has helped us make sense of this inner world, and we're like, oh, like, wow, what is that? And a classic story that I use is Helen Keller, who I think she was 6 or so when she was working with her teacher, Anne. Can't remember her name. I should remember her name. And Anne was trying to help her get what water was. And what Anne did is she took her hand, Helen's hand, and put it under the flow of water and was signing in her hand at the same time water. That's how she put things together. And it's this very similar way. If we have all this feeling going on in our world and we can't make sense of it, we need somebody to say, look, this experience means X and this experience means Y. But we don't know that by ourselves, right? We need help from the outside. This is the developmental task of the child, is to have somebody out there help us make sense of our inner world so that we can then go out and be in the world. That's the whole process. But if we didn't have that, we're still growing up chronologically, and we build the self on top of this, right? And so as we chronologically get older, we are here and we are able to, or we move through the world in one way or the other, but we don't know what to do with all this. And so we use a lot of energy pushing this into the background of our life and trying not to let it interfere. Or sometimes what happens for some people is they start living out of this place in the here and now, thinking it's now, but it's really about the past. And that gets very confusing. And actually, this is probably the crux of all psychotherapy issues that go on. So our task is, how do we stay here in this moment and build a bridge to this inner world of ours so that we can assess what goes on inside? I call this the bridge of attunement, to be able to attune to ourselves. Instead of getting it from outside, we get it from inside. That's what we're wanting to do, is build this bridge of attunement so we can begin to make sense of this, and then we live from that state. There's my pen, it's lost and gone. So that then what happens, let's map it onto here, is that when I'm triggered in the here and now, I can deal with the here and now experience and be connected inside. This is the linking. This is how transformation actually happens, is I'm here in this moment dealing with this while also understanding, making sense of this, helping this resolve, helping it process through so that then this doesn't interfere, but I'm in relationship with this so I can be in relationship out there. Let me see, did I answer all the questions there? Somebody said not knowing that what the trigger was or what part was triggered was also really hard. And that's the problem here, is when it's floating up or erupting from an earlier age, we don't know what the trigger is because it's in a different language system. It's like we're trying to learn Thai, and the sing-song tones don't make sense to our Western mind. So we have to learn a whole different language inside. So that's why it is so hard, but it can be done. And it's about parsing this up. And we go through this in the Becoming Safely Embodied Skills, and just breaking it apart simple by simple. Do all people struggle with these things because everything mentioned in the video encompasses much of our daily life as a human being? And yes, everybody goes through it at some level, but what makes it hard is if this is the problem in place. If I don't know what's going on in here and I'm pushing all that energy down, when life happens in the here and now, I'm split off from myself. So this doesn't become wisdom. This doesn't become understanding. I'm not accessing my own deep internal wisdom because I don't have it, though. I'm split off from myself. And so what happens if people have a more secure growing up, they have this connected so that this then makes more sense, so that when something happens in the here and now, they have access to their inner world without getting overwhelmed by it. Is this all making sense, you guys? Just checking. I think I answered all the questions there. So the person is also saying, I just really wanted to be out of that situation so desperately. And I knew that desire was probably making it worse for me, but I couldn't help myself. And, you know, I think that's true for most people. But it is also true, as the person mentions, that it's probably better for us to not be fighting it. It's a little bit like how to have compassion for ourselves, self-compassion, and compassion for this eruption that's going on. It requires us to be able to step a little bit back from the eruption and be willing to, oh, what is that? What is this? Be willing to explore it and sense into it with kindness and goodness, care and compassion. Now, let me tell you, as I'm hearing myself say that every day, I know when I'm in those states, it's not an easy thing, but it's so doable. And the more we are able to be with it, the less long we are. I don't think that's right English, but we're not in the trigger for as long. So hope that answers. And I see people are watching now, so if it makes sense, let me know. If there are more questions, always glad to answer them. And I always look forward to being with you. So let me know what you think. I have all these drawings everywhere from all these other examples. So I have to always figure out which is the right one to respond to. So you guys, let me know if this works, if this is helpful, and then post your questions so I can answer them. All right, lovies. I'll talk to you next time.